Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today on the podcast, my guest is Dev Agrawal. Dev is a software engineer at Solvio, a member of the Solid.js core team, a content creator, and an expert on event sourcing and general web architecture and full stack development. Dev is one of a kind. He studied in India, moved to the United States to continue his university, and has become so well known in the industry among people and frankly loved. He speaks at conferences, he organizes conferences, he organizes meetups. And in this episode, we talk about all of that. Specifically, we talk about how do you go from somebody going to the US to study to then become someone well known, someone who speaks at conferences, someone who's something of a leader, someone who's on the Solid.js core team? How do you do that? And we spend the first 30 minutes or so talking about how do you actually do that? How do you become well known? How do you become notable? How do you become a person who can have an impact? Dev shares a lot of tips. He actually alludes to a previous podcast guest, Taylor Desseyn, who talked about the idea that your network is your net worth and more. We'll put a link to the episode with Taylor in the show notes. But there's many answers there. If you're interested in making an impact and being known and speaking at conferences, then the first 30 minutes really are for you. From there, we turn the discussion to event-sourced architecture. Dev, in his work at Solvio today, does a lot of event sourcing and has become something of an expert on the subject. We talk in depth about that. What is event sourcing? How does it work? What are the benefits? Business intelligence, snapshots, CQRS, command query responsibilities. If all of these mean anything to you, or if they don't and you want to learn them, then this episode is also for you. Event sourcing is just a really superior paradigm in many ways. And so we learn how we can adopt that and use it. We also covered this in a previous podcast episode of reasonable length and reasonable depth. That episode is also linked in the show notes. Finally, Dev is a member of the Solid.js core team. And of course, we spent the last 30 minutes or so of this episode talking about that. For those who aren't familiar with Solid.js, it's a way to build user interfaces on the web that are very fast and snappy. It creates nice, fast user experiences for people using the web. For example, to buy like airplane tickets or something, they get better experience using Solid.js because it's fast. It's much faster than the de facto standard today, which is a tool called React. Some of you may know React. React is just for building like user interfaces, but its model through which it renders those user interfaces is somewhat slow these days because it does a lot of work that some would call unnecessary. Solid.js is a faster alternative that Dev says in this episode is all the good parts of React without the weird parts of React. And then he goes into detail about that. So if you're interested in rendering user interfaces on the web, Solid.js, React and Reactivity, signals, fine-grained reactivity, all of this, that is in the final third of this episode. Either way, if you're interested in having an impact, being well known, event sourcing, or even Solid.js and React, then this episode is definitely for you. Now, this is very much separate to my day job, and so I'd like to offer this to all of you at no cost. Still, the way you can do that is through partners and sponsors. Let's take a moment to acknowledge our partner, and if you want to partner with the podcast or sponsor it, then there's a link to my profile on X in the show notes. I'd love to partner with you. The Contagious Code Podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters is a great way to level up your coding skills, and also level up your understanding of developer tools. How it works is you pick a tool like Git or Redis or Docker that you maybe want to learn, and you pick a programming language that you want to learn, maybe like Rust or COBOL or Python, whatever it may be. And what they do is they hold your hand as you rebuild the tool that you choose in the programming language that you choose. And by doing so, you get better at both the tool and the language. It's a great 2-for-1. They have a generous free tier, but if you want to start paying, you get a massive discount using the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. Thank you so much for sticking around. Here's my discussion with Dev Agrawal. Dev the Dev, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thanks very much for having me here.
Honestly, I'm so excited to talk to you. I want to talk to you about 3 specific things. One is we can talk about how do you get on the map as a developer. I think that's very important because you are on the map. People know you, people follow you. You're a member of many core teams and so on. And there's so many people who want to do that. And I guess we can talk about it. But number 2 is web performance. You're very active in Solid.js. You know about signals and stuff. And then third is you've been pretty active on event sourcing and things like this. So let's try and wrap that all up in a nice little package today. We can maybe start with becoming notable. I think you're notable. You speak at conferences, you organize conferences. How does one do that? I mean, like you're an immigrant from India, you moved to the US to study, and now you're like you used to work at Clerk, you have conference talks and all of this. How does one get there? And I ask because I'm Indian myself, and I know the Indian population is huge. I know a lot of people want to go to the US and kind of make it in a way like you. What's the formula?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I'm very happy and very thankful that uh, out of like out of so many people that I meet at these conferences, you are acknowledging this because I remember there was a time when I was a nobody. I was beginning my journey in web dev, and I used to watch conference talks on YouTube and other content. And you were one of the many speakers that I watched on repeat to try to understand web development myself. So yeah, getting this acknowledgement from you means huge to me. I'm very starstruck right now just being here with you. So well, just thank you very much for having me and for having this discussion with me.
Bro, I had no idea. I just thought we were, that's cool. So wait, let me get this straight. You watched my stuff before we knew each other?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big reasons why I
It's fine. We're not going to edit anything. We'll just keep it authentic. It's fine. The listeners are friends. It's okay.
got it. Yeah, I basically got a lot of my web dev knowledge through just watching in-depth technical content on YouTube. And at one point, conference talks were the only thing on YouTube that provided that in-depth knowledge. Yes. That's before things like the Contagious podcast existed. And obviously, a lot of the talks around web dev, around React, were yours. So, and yeah, I even remember a bit of time when I was watching your Zeta stuff when you used to work at Zeta. And yeah, but yeah, it's been an incredible journey trying to almost establish like a brand, a presence, or some sort of like known, like some sort of presence online where when I go and meet with people, when I speak with someone either through a conference or a random coworker at my new employer, at my new company, and they're like, "Hey, I know you from Twitter," or "Hey, I watched these YouTube content that you made." It's yeah, it's very fulfilling. It's very rewarding, and yeah, it certainly leads to some unlocking some opportunities that I wouldn't otherwise have had. So yeah, that's I would love to have that conversation.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. So let's go back to university. Mm-hmm. You're studying in India. You're doing undergrad, and you want to go to the US. What was that like? Let's start right at the beginning.
Sure. Yeah. So small correction there. I studied high school in India, and then I moved to the US for undergrad. Right. So I never went to India for college, which in some cases I see as a good thing because the education system is just completely different. So if you're someone coming to the US after already having spent a lot of time in college as an adult in India, you're going to have a very different experience. But for me, the experience was yeah, I came here looking for better prospects in tech.
Here being
Yes, here being in the US, obviously compared to like a place like India, especially the hometown that I'm in from Varanasi in North India, there's a very big, there's a pretty big shift in what you unlock for yourself when you come to a place like US. And I wanted to take full advantage of that. But for a long time, I didn't know how to because people in colleges don't teach how to make a name in the industry or how to actually be successful in the industry because people who are teaching things in college have lived in the college life themselves for a very long time and they have been very disconnected from the industry. So it's almost a skill that that's so essential, but no one around you is going to teach you if you try to learn it through the traditional ways.
So how do you learn it then?
Yeah. So for me, really the kind of the light bulb moment for me was when I really started following Taylor Desseyn, one of our mutual friends. I met him at React Miami at the same time when I met you for the very first time. And after that, I started following him, watching some of his content on social media, on networking, content creation, and putting yourself out there. And really I went on his podcast as well talking about this, and he asked me the same question, and the response I gave him was that I followed the things that you talk about on your podcast, and they led to where I am right now.
That's he was also previously a guest on the podcast. He says things like your network is your net worth. And so what you've done is, what I'm hearing is this was not an accident. Like you went to school in India, you went to the US for college. Nobody taught you how to build a great network and be sort of known. And so you just followed people like Taylor, people like people you looked up to. And so what I'm hearing is it's like intentional. It's not an accident.
Yeah, this has to be something that's intentional. Uh, uh, I think intentionality is, and this is another one of things that Taylor says a lot, that you have to be very intentional with your networking. The industry is so big. Software development, maybe there was a time when it was a super niche thing, but it's such a huge field now. There's new people entering the field that like every second, it's constantly growing. That you really need to find and you, as in I'm talking to someone who's trying to establish a presence in the industry as well. Um, you really need to find almost like your calling, or the things that you really enjoy doing inside this niche of software, and then figure out ways how to get better at those things yourself, and how to share that with the world, that this is what I am interested in, this is what I am doing to develop my skills, and this is how I can impact your company, your project.
Right, and you mentioned React Miami, where we first met, 2022, where Taylor and you met. Was this your first conference, or were you doing other stuff to sort of get out there and share your work with people?
React Miami was my first web dev specific or React specific conference. The other conference that that I had attended at that time was Momentum, which is a conference in Cincinnati. I was living in Cincinnati at that time, so having a decently sized tech conference right in my city was incredible. And yes, volunteering at conferences. The first time I was at React Miami, I used like the student discounts. But outside of React Miami, I volunteered at a bunch of conferences. And again, another learning from Taylor Desseyn. Volunteering is a cheat code. Uh, it gets Volunteering gets you free access to a conference that may cost $500 to $1,000 to $2,000, and it gets you like past what a lot of regular attendees do. Like it gets you, you can be invited to speaker parties and get access, like just talk to speakers directly without being in a huge crowd. You can get access to some behind the scenes of how these events are organized. It's an incredible value that, there's a lot of value to extract from these events. Volunteering is a way to like get to do that for free without paying a cost, and it's a great way to build some skills yourself and get familiar with the industry. So it's I think it has been a great step one for me, and for a lot of people it should be a pretty good step one. In fact, every time I meet a student uh, who's at a conference or who's trying to get to know people, this is the first thing I tell them: look for events that you can volunteer at.
Okay, and so I think that's really awesome, because a lot of people think as a volunteer, you're not paying the cost, but also for the organization, for the conference itself, you're giving them free work. And so it's actually paid, if you think about it, except you don't make money, but you make relationships, you make exposure. That's incredible. Okay, so you started with Momentum and React Miami, and all of this, again, just tying it back to the beginning, this is like intentional effort I want to essentially like fly above my station. I want to be an outlier. I want to be known. And so in parallel, you mentioned you're building software and sharing it with the world. I'm assuming this is like open source work, GitHub, and sharing repos and stuff.
Yeah, as much as I could. The thing about open source is that it's very hard to get people to care about open source. So to make meaningful open source contributions, you really have to kind of find existing projects, but then the skill level is also much higher. So open source is not a great way to. A lot of people think about open source as like another entry point into the industry, another way to maybe establish themselves as someone incoming. That's not really what open source is. It's open source is a way that people who know what they're doing share it with the world, right? It's not a way to like enter the industry. But the way that I was doing it, I was just looking for whatever projects I can. So one example is we used to we organize a hackathon at University of Cincinnati where I went for school, uh, and I was a part of the organizing team. Again, volunteering, great way to get more connections and more exposure. But for me, it was also a great way to look at some problems and find ways to build solutions to them, because there were a lot of things that we were doing internally at the hackathon that were super inefficient. They were just paper systems. Right. For example, we have 100 projects at the end of the hackathon. They all submit their project descriptions and everything, and we have to spend a few hours categorizing them into lists that we can hand over the judges. Then the judges can give them their scores, and then when they come back to us, we could tally them all together to figure out who won. It was a super inefficient system, and I just like spent a weekend trying to like just build a script that exported a PDF based on an array of submissions, and it was great. It was magical, and that's the moment that I realized that a lot of places I can bring value just by trying to figure out what the problem here is, how we can automate it. And it didn't have to be at a job, it didn't have to be an internship. It just had to be something that was close to me, that I could find a way to fix, or I could find a way to build something that addresses it and then share that with the world.
Did you then go talk about this at a meetup or at a conference or anything? Like, hey, this was a problem that we were facing. Here's how I solved it. And sort of like even as a way to like inspire others to start think. Because I think a lot of people, though they may have coding skills, don't yet have the thinking of like, oh, I can apply this anywhere to any problem, even for myself.
Yeah, at that time, I wasn't really into content creation much. But eventually, when I did realize that, okay, content creation is an actually emerging thing within tech, and this is a legit way to kind of market yourself. I did start to take all my learnings that I've had throughout the years, or throughout whatever 4 or 5 years. It didn't even have to be like you have to be 10 years or 15 years experience to make some content. Yeah. Like whatever experience you have, yeah, you can probably find a way to turn that into content that is educational to someone, or that is fun or informational or valuable to someone. So yeah, it wasn't exactly about that problem, but I had a little bit of experience working with terrible microservice architectures. So my first couple of videos were just ranting about microservices, and yeah, they got pretty decent views, especially thanks to a creator that pushed it a little bit, who saw my content early. That's another thing. Once when you can show your excitement about the things you're talking about, and when you can show that yes, you know what you're talking about to some extent, regardless of however limited scope that is, someone is going to find it, enjoy it, and push it further. Yeah. For me, that was Theo. I joined his Discord early. I started sharing some of my videos. At some point, he watched one of them. He enjoyed it. He retweeted it, and not only did I get a boost in like viewership, I also got a boost in my confidence that okay, what I'm doing is helping, is providing value to someone, and that means I should just continue doing that.
Right, and this is sort of like a mandate and an impetus to share it forward, because what Theo did for you, you now get to do for the next person. Right? I think that's such an important point. I love what you said. It gave me a boost, not just in my viewership, but in my confidence. And you started this episode by saying like you're starstruck and you just look up to me and stuff. But I think, while I appreciate that, I also had this when I was early in my career. I significantly remember this one conference, React Boston, 2018. I was just kind of starting out, not well known or anything. And at this conference, there was Ken Wheeler, and there was Swix, Sean Wang. and there was a few other people. There was Jen Wheeler as well. Jen Wheeler, Knitcode Monkey, I think in usernames. And in any case, there were all these people who like Jen Luker, yes. All these people who really, they didn't know me, but they knew when my talk was, and they all said, I'm going to come and support you by watching your talk. And I was like, wow, man, that's awesome. Because these are people I looked up to, and I still look up to. Ken Wheeler, Jen Luker, and Sean Swix. And they literally came there, and they were like watching, and they were engaged, and Swix posted a tweet that day. I still have this tweet. I still look at it sometimes, because he was like, man, this guy is such an amazing public speaker. There weren't a lot of comments on the technical content, more on the delivery, because to be honest, I was not, technically I was quite weak at the time. But what they did was kind of like you, they raised my confidence to the point where I was like, okay, I can talk. Now let's make sure that I say something worthwhile because I can. And then I leveled up technically, and now, a lot of my talks are just live coding and so on. But yeah, I think that's huge, is the role that people like Theo, people with influence can play in like raising your confidence. Okay, so what I'm hearing is the recipe is find what you care about, share what you care about, and share it. Just keep sharing it. Build in public, share, and then someone's going to see it. Someone's going to get value. There's a chance maybe that this someone is going to be someone influential, and then they amplify you. But that can't be the main motivation, right? It's just like, this is going to be valuable for someone. For example, the podcast. Honestly, like I don't look at numbers. I don't look at analytics. I don't know who listens to this. Sometimes sponsors come and they want to like, find out, and then I look, but usually it's not for that, right? It's for education, which leads me to this next question. How do you balance, or rather, how do you like keep your motivation pure? Is that a fair question? Like, it sounds very like philosophical, but I believe there may be wrong reasons to do this, right? Like, you could just want to be known in tech so that you can sell a lot of courses and be rich, which I think that's also fine, honestly. But there's the business then of selling dreams. And then we get into like, I did it, so you can too, maybe, and then you just take a lot of people's money and then they go nowhere. I'm curious, like, how do you make sure that your intentions are, I don't want to say right, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, like how do you make sure you don't kind of go down the dark path of
Grifting.
Yeah, grifting and getting too consumed by the
Dopamine.
the dopamine and whatever sort of like short term or even long term benefits that you might gain by doing the wrong thing. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and one of the reasons that I haven't really like run into that is because I haven't spent that much time in content creation, or I haven't seen that level of success where I could possibly think about like, okay, how can I turn this into a grift? I will be honest, that thought sometimes does cross my mind. Yeah. I'm sure every content creator out there struggles with this at some level of like, how do I, or like it feels so easy to just do something that makes some quick amount of money and then go on with it.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as almost like culturing a garden. I don't make content so that I could get money. I make content primarily because I want proof of work. I know that my resume is never going to give the best possible picture of who I am, technically or personally, professionally, whatever. My resume is always going to be a very limited view of who I am. So for me, content is all about supplementing my identity for when someone who has an opportunity for me, they look at what I've done. There's ample proof for them to look at beyond my resume, so that they can give me, so that they can understand who I am and what I'm doing. And this has already benefited me in a couple different times. My initial role at Clerk, I got it because James Perkins, who was the DevRel at Clerk initially, he saw some of my YouTube content, he really liked it, and then when we met at a conference, he's like, "Hey, we might be expanding DevRel. Would you be interested in joining?" And the job I have currently, it's because I gave a talk at EDA summit, Event Driven Architecture Summit, about almost like local first kind of like technologies. I talked about like an event store and in-memory updates. And the guy who is one of the leaders of Zolvio, my current company, he saw that talk. He was super impressed. He was looking for people who understand this like event sourcing technology to join this team and work with him. And he just saw it and he was excited to work with me. So for me, any sort of like short-term gain that I could get by selling courses or sponsorships or by just randomly saying the wrong things, they're not even they're not even worth it. Yeah. Because just by making genuine content and by talking about things in terms of technical, like their technical depth, yeah, and not in terms of like sharing opinions or trying to sell dreams. For me, that gives me a much bigger benefit because I get to work with cool people, yeah, who really understand what I'm doing and who are maybe even aligned with me on a lot of other things. For me, that's way beyond selling courses.
Yeah, what an answer. So it's really just, it's almost like offering a preview of like, one, this is what I'm interested in, which companies, that's why they want a cover letter often. Two, this is how I work. You live stream on Twitch, which I think is, sometimes, it's a great way of just like, this is how I work. If we're in an office together, this is what you see. And then third, it's like you said, proof of work is like, if you want to maybe preempt, and correct me here if I'm wrong, but you want to give a potential employer the answer to the question, what have you done? What have you done? Because oftentimes, especially like fresh graduates, struggle to find work because work requires experience. But if you don't have experience, then what do I do? So it's like you can't get work because you don't have experience, but you can't get experience because you don't have work. And so the antidote that you put out there is to just like, no, just do the work. If not for an employer, do it for yourself. Like this University of Cincinnati thing, like just build the automation, make it public, talk about it, and then people will see, okay, you've got a body of work. So it's almost portfolio building to speak designer. And then with that, you end up getting jobs like the one you had at Clerk, which was, I wanted to ask you about this. That was a developer advocate position, DevRel. Since then, you're not doing DevRel anymore at Zolvio. You're not. Okay, so how was that? Would you do DevRel again? Would you advise people wanting to get into tech to do DevRel? How has that affected maybe your communication, your collaboration? Because it's a different skill set to IC.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when I started at Clerk, I definitely saw it as a big pivot from like going from just working at a like small consulting contract firm to okay, now we are doing DevRel. It was a huge shift in responsibilities and skill sets, and even as like a personality, because I tend to be very introverted. You might not know that seeing me at conferences, but that's because I've had a few years of working that out of trying to like be active and talk to people. But as someone who's very socially anxious, who likes to not talk much, it was a pretty big shift in like all things I have to do. There are a few things that I didn't even realize initially, like how much physical appearance plays a role. We like to think that it doesn't, but psychological tricks exist, and these are things that I never cared about, and now I have to start caring about these things. So yeah, DevRel was a very interesting journey. I think the skills that make a person a good DevRel also make the person a good developer in general. Simply because as developers, we are collaborating with other developers all the time, yeah, which means we are required to maintain good relationships with other developers, not just on our team, but on adjacent teams, on vendor teams, on open source teams. So the nature of DevRel is very inherent to our industry in general. Having DevRel responsibilities as a job just forces you to build those things, but you don't need that job to build those skills, and you don't need that job to do those activities. So since then, I don't work as a DevRel anymore, but I am on the SolidJS team. I sometimes help out with TanStack Start. And I still make some content on YouTube, and I post on Twitter. And I engage with people on Discords, on GitHub issues, on forums. So even though DevRel is not my job responsibility anymore, I still spend a lot of time doing things that come under the category of DevRel. And I obviously some of it is because I just enjoy it. Some of it is because I genuinely want to help these tools advance in the community and help the existing community support them into using these tools, into succeeding with these tools. And some of it is just because I want to grow those skills for being a normal developer.
It's interesting because I think those skills are, honestly, man, I wish they teach them at university more than everything else, because these are not just like DevRel skills. These are life. DevRel, as far as I understand it, is heavy on the rel. It's really, how do you build great relationships with developers? But honestly, drop the dev and you've got a life skill that is like huge, because who doesn't want, human beings rise and fall on the quality of our relationships. And if you can build awesome relationships with anyone, sure, even devs, then it just unlocks so much, right? And this is probably what led you to joining SolidJS, TanStack Start, to like expanding your career beyond your current job. Would you agree with that?
No, yeah, I totally agree with that. When I joined the SolidJS team, Ryan and I obviously had a conversation, multiple conversations about it. And when Ryan was trying to explain me why he's inviting me and why he thinks I'm a good fit for the team, well, yeah, half of it was whatever experimentation I have been doing around reactivity and playing with SolidJS myself and trying to offer ideas. But the other half of it was how much I talk about Solid online and how much I show up in his live streams, show up in the Discord. So that was a pretty big factor into joining these teams. And same with TanStack. The thing that led Tanner to inviting me to the TanStack team, or to help asking me to hey, we are doing this TanStack Start, come look at the code and offer your ideas as well. It's because I gave that talk at React Rally about building a React meta framework.
Yeah.
It's big, and obviously around that there was I did a Learn with Jason show. I talked a bunch about it on Twitter. So it was not only that I was familiar with the technology, but it was that I was talking about this technology. I was making people aware that this exists and this is how to use it.
And that led you to where you are. And again, that's core DevRel skill. That's super important. Okay. I want to quickly pivot to part two, which is, let's talk about SolidJS front and all this. But one final question about the DevRel thing and the career side is, one, how did you know DevRel wasn't for you? I mean, maybe it's just I know myself, I'm an introvert. But two, what's maybe the best part and the worst part about a developer advocate role?
Yeah. So deciding that DevRel wasn't for me, it was less about that DevRel isn't for me. It's more of that DevRel as a profession, especially in startups, is a very volatile industry, as I'm sure I don't have to explain to you. So a lot of it is just that the industry has been going through some tough times, and DevRel tends to be one of those departments or one of those areas of effort that cannot really tangibly or numerically show their value. And every single time a business has to deal with money, they look at whatever tangible things they have and cut off everything else, right? So, and the other part of it is that a lot of teams, they don't know what they want out of their DevRels. So if I'm working at a company, or if I'm talking to a new company that wants to hire me as a DevRel, they have to be clear about what they want out of their DevRel. If they're not clear about that, we're going to be talking for a couple months, and then at the end they're going to hit some realization and they're going to say, no, never mind, we cannot do this. So it was less about DevRel as a job and more about DevRel as an industry that kind of pushed me away from it.
Right. Yeah. I've seen this so often. And a lot of people say, oh, but it's so hard to measure. Well, yes. I mean, how do you measure relationships? Is it transactional? Is that, oh, Dev was on my podcast, so now we're better friends? Or is it more, we experience a bunch of stuff together and we see? And is it a lot? Because capitalism plus DevRel is really bad in a way, because it's really turning relationships into capitalistic means to ends, where it's like the human becomes a transaction machine, right? And so then you're like not really being friends with someone for the sake of it. You're being friends with someone so that maybe they'll use clerk, and if that's the case, and then if it's like an economy crunch, then it's like, why are they not using clerk right now? Why are you not doing your job? You know, and so I think that's. You can't marry capitalism and relationships, and I fully agree with that. And so at DataStax, where I work, it's a function of marketing, which, you know, it's basically top of funnel. It's like, go tell a bunch of people about our stuff, and then we'll see how many of those become leads, and then we'll see how many of those become qualified leads, and we'll sell to them. At least it's measurable that way, but then what kind of relationships are you going to have? And I also don't agree that DevRel has to be a function of marketing. I'm totally fine to disagree and commit to the way my employer wants to do it, but I think DevRel has to be a product reporting function, because ultimately you're going to listen. That's what relationships are. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you're going to hear, oh, the product is not working for these people in this way, and then you shape the product. You know, and ultimately you create a product out of the relationship so that people get the product that they want, as opposed to the product you make them use. So anyway, I have many thoughts about this, and I so agree with what you're saying, DevRel as an industry, and I hope we get there. I'd love to switch focus a little bit and talk about event sourcing. You've been very active with event sourcing. We have like a episode on the podcast, like an hour 45 something, about event sourcing. It's like the deepest dive on event sourcing. We talk about Kafka, we talk about queues and all this. People didn't listen to that, I'm fairly sure. Let's assume, because it's one of the early episodes. I was super inexperienced, and but let's say whoever's listening, they don't know anything. What is event sourcing? How does it show up in apps? Should we be using it? Why?
Yeah, event sourcing is such a loaded concept that it's very hard to talk about it without bringing in like a bunch more concept. It almost reminds me of React server components, where you cannot talk about server components without talking about caching and app router and React core team moving to Vercel. But I sometimes have similar feelings about event sourcing, because in some ways it is such a simple fundamental concept that data is immutable and everything else just follows from it. It is another thing that reminds me of is functional programming versus regular imperative programming. The only fundamental difference between imperative and functional programming is that in functional programming you never reassign variables. And every other property of functional programming that people love to talk about, down to monads, it's a consequence of this one fundamental shift in programming model. I'm sure someone is going to comment that I stole this from Uncle Bob, but yes, I did steal this from Uncle Bob. He's the one who helped me realize that through one of his rants, that this is really the core difference between imperative and functional programming. And it's the same difference between how we normally build apps with mutable data, with databases where we go and update a row, we change its value, versus an event source system where you never update data, you just add new data into your database. And the current state that you see at any point is a projection of everything that has happened so far. So the classic example is a shopping cart, where in a regular system, when you add something to a shopping cart, then you add something else, and then you remove it, now you just have a shopping cart table with one row. Whereas in an event source system, you would see that one item was added, then another was added, and then another was removed. And the current state of the cart is a sum of these events, or a product of these events. A projection is what the technical term. But it unlocks such a new kind of like a lot of different dimensions. For example, this information is incredibly valuable for any product or any business to have. That not only that this person it's fine that this person has this one item in the cart that they checked out, but the fact that they added something and then at some point they removed it from the cart, this piece of data has a lot of value to business that we cannot even predict, because it might become valuable 6 months down the line. So the only thing that we need to ensure is that we never lose data. We only make sure that everything is an append only, and then everything else kind of falls out of that. So, but because this all these consequences, all these ways of we have to unlearn basically a lot of things that we have normally learned of how we build apps, how we optimize apps, that it becomes very difficult to grasp the implications of this fundamental difference.
That also probably changes the way you build apps, right? Like, so let me just say back to you what you said, because I think it's so profound, it's worth repeating. Because it's a strong paradigm shift. And we also talked about this in the event sourcing episode. I'll put a link in the show notes, where the event source model, you use the word projection. I have a love-hate relationship with this word. I'm sure you can understand why as a DevRel person, because we sometimes in the industry use big words that can confuse people. Things like stochastic gradient descent in machine learning, which just means try a bunch of stuff randomly. Let me say back to you, first principles, plain English, and you can confirm or deny. In an event source system, shopping cart, instead of just reading the state of the shopping cart from a database, what you do is you read a series of events. So if you read the state of a shopping cart from a database, what you will get is the cart's empty, or maybe there's one item. That's it. No other data. You can't do any business intelligence. You get no analytics other than what you're using. With event sourcing, you don't have like that. You have a series of events. Like you said, user added item 1, added item 2, deleted item 2, only item 1 is left. So then when they open the cart, you get basically a big array, a big list of these events, and then you compute the UI from these list of events. So you still end up with exactly the same state, but the way you get there is different. The event sourcing approach literally sources events to derive the UI state and then renders it. Am I good so far?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so then let me pull on this a little bit. In the tradition, let's call it traditional, non-event sourced. In the traditional sense, what you would do is maybe if it's a SQL database, select star from cart items where user ID is this, right? That's it, and you get it. With the event sourced state, assuming you're storing your events in Postgres or something, you would select star from events where user ID is this.
Yeah, you would select star from events where, let's say, event.type is cart, and then event.cart ID is the user's cart ID or the user ID. So you would have a different way of filtering them. But yes, you would be essentially filtering all the events for that cart. So instead of fetching the state for that cart, you'd be fetching all the events for that cart and then building the state of the cart.
Right, and that's amazing in practice. But then what if there's like a billion events? I've had my Amazon account since 2013, probably 2015. So that's 10 years now. I have bought so much stuff. I still buy, like recently I bought like a power strip and some smart plug. So my cart has seen some things. And I can't imagine receiving such a long array on the server side if I'm server rendering this page and then like iterating through it and then deriving the state. So there has to be some way to do this in a way that's like super performant as well.
Yeah, and this is exactly where one of those points where we have to understand the implications of the new architecture and maybe unlearn some things, but maybe also see the things that we already use and how they work in this new context. So let me put it to you like this: whenever you have an application that's complicated, that has a lot of data, that has a lot of traffic, you are going to run into bottlenecks with reading data. And the way we solve them is by caching. So a technical solution to what you presented is literally just caching, where instead of reading all those events every single time, we read them once, we cache that data, and now we are back to a place where we are only fetching the card state. And now when there's a new event, we go back, we go over all the events, we get the new card state, and then we just update our cache. So the next time we just read from the cache again. So now you don't have to pay that cost every time you read. You only have to pay that cost when you write. So again, caching is a very well-known, already super familiar technology. And in many ways, event sourcing, if anything, but improves it because cache validation is basically built in. You have events that tell you exactly which caches to invalidate when, right? So it actually solves one of the bigger problems of cache invalidation. In some ways, obviously, in super complicated case, it's still going to fail. But that's the technical solution. The other solution is a more uh, kind of like business oriented solutions, because the thing with event sourcing is that we are not the first ones to be event sourcing. Accountants do event sourcing. They have been doing it forever, and they have this concept of closing an account. uh, Basically, when you look at your bank transactions, let's say, they are event sourced. You see a list of transactions you've made, and at the end the balance is calculated by literally going over your transactions and summing them up. So your bank transactions, they are event sourced. And the way they handle this is by closing your account at maybe at the end of the month or at the end of the financial year. They store the balance at that point. And now every time you try to calculate your next year's balance, you only have to go back to the checkpoint, the point where you close the account. You don't have to go further back than that, right? And so let's try to apply this in cart with a shopping cart example. uh, you add some things, you remove some things, you check out. But as soon as you check out, we know that the cart is empty now. We can just stop there, and now we can start recording the events for the next cart. So now we only need to go back as far as your last checkout instead of going back to 2013 when you first opened your account. So there are solutions to these problems, both technically and in how you model these events or how you model your logic. It's just we have to understand how these things apply in our new context.
That's such a well put answer. Okay, so caching. Interesting. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that the event sourcing language for this is snapshots.
Yes, snapshots. Yes, a snapshots is like a more technical term for it. I just like to think of it as caching because you can like really implement it at any level. Uh, snapshots. Um, snapshots can actually apply to both of these concepts in a way. Like this mechanism of like closing the stream and then starting a new one. Some people also call that a snapshot, where at some point in an event they have a snapshot of it. So yes, there's a lot of terminology that gets confusing here, but yes, snapshots can you can call either of them snapshot depending on who you're talking to.
Okay, so let's model this. Let's go through the shopping cart again. So instead of deriving the state from all my events from the past 10 years, what you can do is, at my last checkout, Amazon, let's assume they have this architecture. They would store a snapshot or cache my checkout page, and that's the static state of the page. That's kind of like if you read it from Postgres, then the traditional architecture. You just store that somewhere. And then the next time I come to my cart, or if I write into my cart, you pull the state from the snapshot or the cache. And then if there's any events that have happened after that, you sort of replayed those at like 3, 4, 5 events on top. Okay, awesome. That's a really solved problem. It sounds like more pain than the traditional way, which is probably is, but then there's probably more value as well. Is this something y'all are using in production? Does it serve your, like, how does it show up in practice?
Yeah. So this is an architecture that's being okay. Let's the first place where it shows up in practice. We use Git.
I was gonna say. So when I teach event sourcing, this is where I go, because Git is nothing more than each commit is an event, and you can time travel and replay because they're just events. And Git literally derives the current state from. Okay, so say more. That's the example.
Yeah, Git is a fantastic example, and honestly, most modern databases do something like this. I'm pretty sure both Postgres and MySQL, under the hood, they look like an event sourced database where they store a list of transactions that have happened.
Right? The WAL, the write ahead log, or
Yeah, I missed the exact specific terms for that, but yes, they have some sort of a log of transactions that have happened over time, and whenever you query the database, it's actually like projected over all the transactions that have happened, and it's because it's an essential part of replicating data and distributing data over a set of nodes, right? But that's more of a technical feasibility thing. In terms of architecture, or in terms of like building your entire application around it, one of the key values that it offers is that the events that you store, they each event can carry like a lot of business meaning. So the event is not going to be as simple as user updated data. It's going to be more like user reset password, or cart checked out, or I something added to cart. These events are going to make sense not just to the application in terms of how to update the state, but to the business owners, to the stakeholders, where you show them these are the events that have happened for this person. What do we want to do from this point? Things like that. And in terms of how you build the application around it, yes, that changes a lot. One of the key elements that this introduces is something called CQRS, or Command Query Responsibility Segregation. Now, in my opinion, CQRS is just a good pattern to have in general anyways. In fact, the web is built around CQRS. Like links or GET requests and form submissions are two very separate things in the web. So in many ways, like this idea of CQRS is also built into many of the fundamental platforms that we use. It's just something that we haven't been able to fully embrace. So that's another thing that event sourcing kind of pushes you towards.
Just CQRS being command query responsibility segregation, as you said. Let's break that down, plain English, first principles. Command being a mutation, like a write, and query being a get, a read. And you just separate those responsibilities, meaning you have read events, you have write events, they do not mix. And you said, like, for example, on HTTP, get requests, literally just get, and post, put, patch, and delete all do commands or writes. So far, so good, right? Okay, great. How does events, so I'm trying to wrap my head around, how does event sourcing push you towards this? Does it just force you to have separate events per command and query, or is there more to it?
So the way event sourcing kind of pushes you towards it, because uh, is because when you make a GET request, most applications, they don't want to see a log of events. They just want to see some state, right? So every GET is going to be some sort of a projection. Every GET is going to go to the database, fetch some whatever events that are relevant to that query, project over them to build some sort of state using a state machine. They might be reading from a cache as well, but that's like not necessary. And then every post or every mutation, all it's going to do is to write an event or multiple events to the database. That's it. Because when events are how you store your data, they are the internal structure of your application. That's not something you want to expose to your API or to your UI, right? You want to keep your schema protected. So obviously you cannot have your get and post requests talking events. They have to be more per use case specific. So every get and every post behaves very differently. Where in a regular SQL kind of traditional environment, they're both just SQL queries. There's not too much of a difference between them, but the difference really highlights itself when you're talking in events, because now you're creating a list of events and projecting over them, versus you're making a decision and then you're pushing something to the event stream. So it really separates how you think about your reads and your writes. Like you're not using the same data model between them anymore.
Interesting. Is an example of this something like Redux? I remember Redux is this, or maybe even React, right? Like the state management of React initially, I don't know if it's still that way, is state is immutable, and you use state and sets, you dispatch events to update state. It's literally event sourced state. You dispatch events to update state. Is that an example? Is that a realistically good example of event sourcing in the case of like UI and front end?
Yes, Redux is an amazing example of the event sourcing pattern applied to like in memory state mostly. And one of the biggest benefits that you see as a consequence of that is time travel, because you have a log of events that at any point, that's how you derive your state. You can just go back in time, say that I only want the events up until 5 minutes ago, and check what does the state look like at that time. So you have this incredible capability to go back and replay things, or maybe even replay with different logic. So you have the same actions, but you just change your reducer logic in Redux, and now you have different behavior based on the same logic. Elm had really cool demos of this initially because it also works the same way, where it stores the list of events and runs them over your UI repeatedly and gets the current state. So yes, Redux, Elm, these are essentially the principles of event sourcing applied to in-memory UI state, and that's where we see the benefits of it.
Incredible. I once built. I worked extensively with Redux at my job in a company called Contiamo in 2017, and man, I built this one middleware for Redux that every time an event would be dispatched, I just take that event and the user's metadata ID and just store it in a database. And then the cool thing is we had like Sentry or Posthog or Google Analytics. We had these like observability logs per user behavior for every user just for free because we were using Redux anyway. And we could literally see, okay, people are doing this, they're clicking this, they're missing that button. The level of visibility we had was incredible. And it's kind of mind-bending to think you can just get this for free with event sourcing. However, maybe you can help give me and all the listeners who hear this, who want to adopt it, a little therapy session. Because it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And I just recently built an app for camp. We talked about this. And I built it the traditional way. Mm-hmm. I know about event sourcing. I'm even more inspired now, but you could tell me there's the new database, it's the best database in the whole world. I'm still going to use SQLite or Postgres. You could tell me there's a new, UI library, Solid.js. I still use React. I'm sorry, but you get the idea. It's so hard to break the pattern because it works. Mm-hmm. And honestly, for my app, business intelligence it's not even a business app. It's a nonprofit app. So while I see there's value, I could get a lot more from event sourcing. I just don't think in that as the default. Mm-hmm. Kind of like some engineers who don't do test-driven. Yeah, they don't write tests first or at all. What's the way to fix the default in the human mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's honestly, something along these lines was a question that was asked in my interview in my current employer. It's like, how do we get people to better understand event sourcing, especially because I was talking about DevRel stuff. But yeah, this is a great point that you've hit. Ultimately, things fall down to familiarity at some point. The thing that you're more familiar with, you're just going to naturally gravitate towards it. It happens the other way too. One of my coworkers, he has been doing event sourcing for 10, 15 years. And for him, event sourcing is a much faster way for him to build apps. If you force him to use a traditional approach, it's going to be slower for him because he's just better figured out his patterns around how to effectively and efficiently model the application that you're building into events and how to quickly build that out in whatever way that you want to. And a lot of it is just going to come down to how much practice you have. Where I find event sourcing more familiar or more productive to me is because it allows me to not think about my data structure much. It allows me to just store whatever events I have in whatever form I have. And over time, I can come up with different ways to look at that data, different projections over the same events, which means I have to do a lot less work messing around with data structures. It means that if a new business requirement comes in, my app is a lot more adaptable because I'm never losing data. I know I can just go over the existing data and implement a new feature very easily. The other thing that it allows me to do is better vertical slicing. It's another kind of concept that I've been trying to experiment with, trying to understand a lot more in the past few years. But the idea that we build apps in small vertical slices that are independent of each other, rather than these horizontal layers where I have my UI layer, then API layer, then logic layer, and database layer. These things have been enabled by event sourcing for me. And I think really at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how much do we value keeping around data or losing data, and how much are we willing to like invest into learning the best patterns around it.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. While you were talking, I was wondering if what the success rate might be of an experiment. Because what if I build an app, traditional approach, and then open cursor and go agent mode and be like, now make this event source. I don't know.
I've tried that.
How did it go? How did it go?
It didn't go it didn't go great, because along with losing data in like in traditional systems, along with losing data, there's also a decent bit of loss of context. Like we have had this problem since the beginning where we try to model our data like in terms of SQL tables with all these entity relationship diagrams. And once you have this modeled out, you can like make a chart out of it. You can show it to someone, and people will understand that what the data looks like, but it has no representation of your logic. You are looking at the structure of the data. You're not looking at what that data is being used for or what you're doing with that data. What does your application look like? How does it orchestrate things between each other? Or even what the app is about. Like you can have two apps that are for wildly different purposes, share a data schema for a lot of things, just because that's what there are certain things that can only be modeled a certain way within SQL, right? But with events, when I have a stream of events like cart added, cart removed, checked out, orders, order approved, things like that, it shows a very clear story of what I'm trying to do with the app, or what is the business model, or what is the behavior of this. Because the stream of events describes the specific interactions between the users and the different systems. It's a much better view, not just like for technical, but for business people.
Right.
One of the another thing that event sourcing pushes us towards is this concept called domain-driven design, and a lot of event sourcing literature comes out of the domain-driven design community, where people are really fond of like trying to understand business needs and model the business needs first, and then the application around it. Again, that's also a very different way of thinking. A lot of times, if you're in exploratory mode, if you're just trying to build something that works, you're not going to be thinking about the domain first. You're going to be thinking about the implementation. So this is another place where it takes a while to get used to this idea.
Yeah. You raised a very important question to me, which is you mentioned the ERDs, entity relationship diagrams with SQL. And you said also earlier, when I'm building in an event source first way, I can just create a bunch of events and store the data somewhere. I don't get any of this. As in like, so if I was to build something with event sourcing today, what I would do is I would create a SQL table called events, but this has a schema. So okay, fine, I'd create some columns, ID, type, whatever, But then the schema would probably change based on, I can't just like empty events in there, just like throw random events in there. And so maybe SQL is not even the right format. Maybe I should do something like an Astra DB, Cassandra, Scylla, something schema-less, because then I can literally just like shove a bunch of events in there. I'm curious. We know the traditional way you make an entity relationship diagram, you make tables and relationships and so on. Or if you're doing something schema-less, fine, create collections and put documents. With event sourcing, if you just want like to junk drawer events and figure out your application, where are you storing these events? How do you like get started with that layer?
Yeah, great question. You can use pretty much anything as like, for example, there's a decent number of people who do event sourcing on top of SQL, but they just store like the event in a JSON blob, so they don't have to worry too much about it. Especially because you don't often need to query inside the events. You can have the metadata outside the JSON blob if you want to do indexing on top of it, but you can store it as JSON. We have also seen a lot of event sourcing specific databases, or databases that just assume that you want to do event sourcing and give you the best solution. Event Store DB is kind of the classic name in this world. There's a couple new ones, and obviously tomorrow is Local First Conf. where Johan Schickling is going to unveil Live Store, which he's building in a similar fashion, trying to ensure that event sourcing is the way we build applications, and then every other advantage, every other kind of like positive benefit just falls out of that architecture. So there's specific databases, there's regular databases that you can use. When it comes to like schemas and migrations, again, the same thing as caching earlier. You can apply a technical solution. Like we have been doing database migrations forever. We can just do database migrations on events as well. We know how to do them. But the other solution, again, the more domain or business oriented solution is that you don't migrate them, because the event schema is a product of the business context at that time. If today I make an event schema, I'm making it based on the requirements I have in my head today, or the requirements that the business has specified today. If 6 months down the line the requirements change and the schema changes with it, if I also destroy the old schemas, I destroy that context. So a lot of times what we want to do is keep the old events as they are, and only when we go to read them, okay, we are going to interpret them differently, because that event was created when we had the old view of how the world worked. Now that we are bringing that event into the new world, or into our new context, we are going to slightly change it so that we can do our computations. But for historical purposes, it's actually beneficial to have the old schemas around, because they better represent the evolution of our system.
And of your business. It's like a museum of sorts. Interesting. So okay, event store DB, live store, these are great options. There's also something to be said for testing. You can integration test applications traditionally the way we know, but with event sourcing, you can even test your derived functions. Yeah, like given these events always, and you can just make sure you arrive at a serialized state. That's awesome. But you can also test like chaos scenarios better, yeah? Because you could probably have like domain-specific sets of events, and you could, I don't know, this software probably already exists, but you could have a system that like will just fire random events at something and see what happens. Does that exist? Is that something y'all are using?
Yeah, exactly. No, that's again another big benefit of making every change explicit, or making every interaction, every event explicit in our database, that we get to just test things as pure functions. We call them given when then tests, where given a certain set of events happened, when we have this new event, then what does the state look like? So a lot of our business logic tests just become these pure, if we have these events, what happens next? And you, like you said, you can come up with random scenarios to test like whatever edge cases that you have, and you can be very confident about the logic that handles these events based on these tests. Now, obviously, if there are cases that you never come up with, those are going to be buggy. But every time you can come up with an edge case or a random series of things, or even a legitimate happy path workflow, you can just say that, okay, here's a given set of events that describe this scenario that I have in my head. What is the next thing?
Right.
Is it the thing that I expect it to be? If not, let's fix the logic.
That's amazing. That's like an extra layer of testability. Man, I really want to break this pattern of like traditional apps and go event sourced, but it's so hard. One day, let's talk about Solid.js. I think that's an important topic. I mean, your shirt literally says "got signals," and what are well, let's maybe do it like this. I mentioned earlier I'm stuck to React for the same reason. Like, I know there may be better things out there. Event sourcing is a better pattern for the reasons you mentioned, but I'm stuck in my traditional world. Actually, I do use React for the most part, this app I built recently, but it's with Astro. So the framework is Astro and the library is React. And I know I could do Astro and Solid. In fact, I do Astro and Solid sometimes. But I'm curious, let's maybe start right at the beginning. What is Solid, and then why Solid, given that React is still like the top dog?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way I like to think about Solid.js, and also the biggest thing that has attracted me towards Solid and away from React, is that, and this is how I love describing Solid. Yeah, it's funny, but I'm gonna get to effects, but I actually really love FX. Anyways, Solid is, to me, it's the best parts of React without the worst parts of React. That's how I love thinking about it. It the first time I was using React, it took a while for it to click for me, especially hooks. I've been using hooks for about like 2 months, trying to figure out what they are. But there was a certain moment when the composability aspect of hooks like clicked in my head, and from that point on, I like really started enjoying using React. That's that composability aspect is something that Solid perfectly retains. In fact, in some ways, you could argue that it's more composable, but that's like it's a very pedantic definition. But it gives me the declarative, the simple, clean API, the composability, and especially the features like suspense and error boundaries and JSX that I love about React, but it removes a lot of the weird cases and inefficiencies in the model that React suffers. So yeah, that's I guess my high level intro of Solid.
Okay, so it's exactly the same as React, except without the bad parts. I mean, that's what you said. It's the best parts of React without the bad parts of React, which is React without the bad parts. So there's JSX. I've written solid code. It looks exactly like React. The only difference is the reactivity system. It's fine grained. Can you explain to us what is fine grained reactivity? Why does it matter? And how is React different?
Yeah, definitely. The core difference is components in React always rerun. Every time you create some state inside a React component, the entire component and all of its children are now observing that state. So that every time you change that state, everything from that point on has to rerun to figure out the next, what does the UI look like
Crazy.
on the next point, right? Yeah. Yes, they have a bunch of optimizations around it, but that's the fundamental model. It's also a difficult model to grasp when you come from regular JavaScript, because regular JavaScript does not work that way. In regular JavaScript, like functions run once, you can create things inside them, but that's not how it works in React. In React, functions are like these pure transformations of props and state into UI structures. Solid works a lot more like regular JavaScript, where it's just a function that runs and creates a bunch of things and returns some UI that you attach somewhere. If you're used to React, it's a little awkward to figure out what exactly Solid is doing. Yeah. But in a sense, it's literally just creating reactive like little reactive computations inside a function component, and every time you set some state, it doesn't rerun the entire components, the entire component function or any of its children. Instead, it knows exactly which of these reactive signals or reactive computations need to rerun. It's essentially it creates a graph of dependencies. So when you read some state inside your UI or inside an effect or inside like a memo or a derived state, it knows that this is the exact thing that needs to rerun when this state updates. So in that sense, it's much smarter about how data depends on each other, instead of saying that this is a component, the entire component depends on the state. So it can be that's where the fine-grained aspect comes in. So instead of the entire component rerunning or subscribing to data, you have individual nodes that subscribe to data.
Interesting. And because of this, the area of change when something changes is much smaller, therefore fine-grained, and that means your app has to do less work. So it's going to feel faster. It's going to feel more fluent to users. It's going to be, I meant to say fluid. Yeah, excellent. That's great. What are some barriers? Like, why do people not? I mean, it sounds like the best parts of React without the tricky parts of React, and it's faster. Why is it not replaced React?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I don't even know if I'm super confident about the answer that I'm about to give, but there's like a bunch of different cases. The biggest one is likely just the dominance React has in the ecosystem and how scared people are to like try new things these days. As compared to like 10 years ago, people were actually pretty happy to adopt new things. But in the last few years, it has gotten a lot more stagnant.
Why do you think that is?
Uh, I mean, some of it goes back to the DevRel conversation, where just people are just getting more risk averse, or less risk averse. I don't know, but they're just willing to take less risks. They want to go with the stable options. They want to they don't want to invest too much into development innovation. They just want to get things working. Um, and the other reason is obviously AI. AI is better trained on React code, so it's going to be better at React code. But these are like kind of the organizational aspects of why it's difficult to replace React, or it's difficult to overtake React in any sort of sense. When it comes to the technology, obviously a lot of people are so familiar with React's model. Like React has had many years to kind of spread its word, in a sense of like evangelize of like this is how you build UIs. You just have pure objects. You destructure props and you write code however you want. And you, as long as you return some JSX, it's fine. You can do whatever you want in that component function. It doesn't matter. It's going to be thrown away and re-rendered. Now at some point it added its own, like it created its own programming language almost, with the rules of hooks, and then which are now enforced by the compiler. But it's in a very real sense, this is a new language, or React is a language that a lot of people have adopted for building UIs, and Solid is just a very different language. Solid is a lot more closer, like almost closer to the middle, in the sense that JavaScript functions run once. They are mutable. You can create let, and you can do let and const inside of your components, and they are just regular variables. You can even create state outside of your components. So your hooks are not limited to like within components. You can just create a signal in the global scope. But that's just a different language. It's a different way to think about data. Like every time you have to access some data, you have to call a getter, which means you're kind of like it forces you more into deriving data rather than running for loops. Like for inside a React component, you can just run a for loop and have a let on top that you mutate. Those things are not as easy to do, or even as valuable to do in Solid. In Solid, you have to access the data inside a function, and then return something for the next function. So these are little, and you cannot destructure props. So a few little things that add up, that kind of contribute to it's just a different model to think. But if you give SolidJS to someone who has never seen React before, it's going to be a very different story. I think they're going to adopt Solid much faster than they're going to adopt React, just because React is a very different mental model from regular JavaScript.
Which is interesting because the discourse early was React is just JavaScript. What are you talking about? But I think that's so interesting because it's this catch-22. We talked earlier when we were on the career topic where people can't get jobs because they don't have experience, but then they don't have experience so they can't get jobs. React is like that, where it's maybe not the best anymore way to do great UIs, but it is the thing that has the jobs. But people who don't know anything would then learn React to get the job, which reinforces it. Mm-hmm. And so to your point earlier, you said if somebody doesn't know anything and they learn something first, if they learn Solid, it will be different. But because there's more React jobs than Solid jobs, they probably won't do that. And the cycle perpetuates in a way. I think that's so interesting. I'm looking at your shirt, got signal. The core primitive of fine-grained reactivity is signals, as you said. It's like these getters and setters of state. Looking at your shirt, I just realized, besides React, every other UI library on the web would answer yes to this question. So then is this shirt just a dig at React? That's maybe the joke question, but I'm curious. React kind of has fine-grained reactivity now, yeah, with the compiler, which I think is maybe out of beta. I haven't kept up, but they're working towards that. However, they would still answer no to got signals because we got compiler instead. What does that mean for regular developers? Does React now pair fully with Solid in terms of fine-grained reactivity, or is there nuance there?
No, not even close. There are, this has been a big discussion for like that basically started when React started saying that they are also now fine grained. I even had a meme about it at some point. You know, the one where everyone joins hands and then there's a Teletubby that comes in at the end. Yeah, their vision of or their view of fine grained is still very much stuck in an immutable world. It's where you have some data and you have all your components. You pass all the data goes through all the components. You have the entire new view of the UI, and then you go and apply that to the screen. Their mentality of fine grained only comes in within those components. That they can optimize the execution of the components so that it only runs the code that is necessary, but everything else is still the exact same. In fact, this is a big part of my talk on Tuesday at Local First, where the fundamental model is still the same. You have to build a huge chunk of VDOM and then diff it against the previous one and then apply the changes. Fine-grained reactivity is a lot more than that. Dynamic signals is one of the biggest places where this comes in. Signals in SolidJS, or really in any framework these days, they can change dependencies throughout their life cycle.
Oh, wow.
So you can say that if something, then run some computation, else run some other computation. And based on this if condition, this signal will subscribe to different inputs. So it doesn't need to, it only receive updates for the things that it actually cares about. And then the other thing is fine-grained rendering, where instead of like building large chunks of UI to diff with the previous version, you actually have very little fine-grained nodes that talk to us individual DOM elements. So a classic example is a to-do list. If inside a to-do list, you go inside a to-do and change it's completed from false to true, you're going to have a single reactive node that notices that change and knows exactly that this is an input checkbox that depends on this to-do's completed value, and I'm going to set the active property to true. That's all. Like this information is built into the system. You don't have to build a chunk of UI and then diff it to figure out that this is the DOM element that needs to be updated. So the capability to be fine-grained is like the ceiling is very high. It's not just about like not rerunning user code, but it's also about knowing where to go and what side effects to run. And this is the fundamental capability that React just doesn't have. React is necessarily a VDOM system where it has to build up the entire new state.
Right, and I think Mishko Hevry, who maintains Quick, did a really great diagram about this, saying React will never be fine-grained, where he had this awesome graphic of, look, in Solid, this little value subscribes to this signal, end of story. And so there's no tree traversing, where in React, it still functions recursively calling. It's just they return instantly instead of doing any work. And so you're still going to go like 8 levels down a VDOM tree. And that iteration is just inherently more expensive than Solid, which is such a great way, because the function will just return immediately, it's memoized. And so that what that means is React will always by design do more computation, even with the compiler, as I asked, than Solid. But Solid has its own compiler. So what does that compiler do?
Yes, Solid's compiler is actually super interesting. It turns JSX into regular DOM function calls. That's basically all it does.
Wait, but to transform JSX, you need a parser. You need like, I guess compilers are Okay.
Yeah, so it literally all it does is when you have a div JSX, it replaces that with a document.create div element, a more optimized version of that, but that's the idea, and basically an equivalent of create effect or use effect. So it literally, for every DOM node that could be updated, it creates an effect function, like a React use effect, that listens to the specific values that you've rendered inside that div or that P. And when that effect runs, it goes like div.text content, this new value. That's really all it does. There's demos out there where Ryan like just writes all of the code like by hand without JSX, and then shows what it looks like with JSX. Because like literally you don't need JSX to do rendering with Solid. JSX is really just a convenience, so that you don't have to write DOM operations and effects yourself. It's a convenience on top of that, but really it's just like creating a DOM element and writing an effect that changes the properties of that DOM element.
Interesting. So it's kind of like React has always required Babel to be its compiler. Solid just has that. That's the difference.
Yeah, I mean, just like React has always required a JSX transform, Solid has always required a JSX transform. Obviously, you can do it without it. If like even in React, you can just write react.create element. In DOM, in Solid, you can do document.create element.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned React, Solid, they're very close. And you're a member of the Solid core team. I want to ask you about SolidJS 2.0, which is that out yet?
It's super experimental right now. It's going to be a while, but yeah, it's coming along very nicely, and I'm super excited for it.
One thing I heard about SolidJS 2.0 is async signals, which is that like is that like the use hook in React? Is that like suspense where a signal can just pause and return some intermediate value? And that, if that's the case, how does a developer specify, hey, this is the intermediate value? Is it like try catch or?
Yeah, exactly. It's the same idea as React, because again, it's Solid 2.0 just continues to develop on the idea that I mentioned earlier, that we take the best parts of React and remove the worst parts of it. I love the model of suspense and error boundaries and the use hook and transitions in React. React 19 came out with so many great features, and I'm very happy that they re-architected their entire internal internal implementation to use Fiber so that they could do this. But there are so many quirks with using suspense. Like there's a very good reason why React doesn't want you to do data fetching without a framework. It's because it knows that if you try to use these async primitives without an external library to like help you around those edge cases, you are going to like shoot yourself in the foot many times. And that's what I love about Solid. Solid has the same features. It has the same throwing mechanism for suspense, so that you don't have to deal with intermediate states. You have this inversion of control and all the nice things that come with like rendering something off screen. The performance benefits of that, like you don't have to kill it. You just keep it off screen, do it as much as you can, and then later just swap it in. Thing like with transitions. Solid's model just has cleans up so many of those edge cases. For example, you don't have to create an additional wrapper for suspense component. You can literally fetch some data within a component and then use suspense in the same component's return JSX. Wow. And that suspense fallback will work. It's because when we create an async signal, creating data doesn't subscribe the entire component to it. It doesn't react. But in Solid, only where you read that data is what subscribes to it. Yeah. So when you create an async signal, that's fine. We just created it. We don't need to stop executing anything. We can continue rendering literally everything that doesn't depend on that async. But as soon as you read that async data inside your JSX, it's going to look for the closest suspense boundary and trigger that. It doesn't need to go up the component tree. It just needs to go up the JSX tree. And okay, here's the suspense. It doesn't need to be in a different component. It can be right there.
Wow. And so, like you said, it cleans up a lot of these quirks that some would say are just totally unnecessary, like having extra components in your tree and so on. Incredible.
Or like stopping execution of component in the middle just because you use the use. It doesn't matter. There are demos out there that have components nested inside each other, and all those nested components fetch data, but they all fetch data in parallel without any hoisting. Wow. Because when you create signals, you just create a signal and then you continue rendering. Wow. You can even nested components can continue rendering and fetching their data And that's fine because it's all fine-grained. It's all separate from each other. We don't tie things to components.
Right, and so that's automatically no network waterfalls by default.
Yes. Now, when the conversation comes to network waterfalls, the real problem is actually code splitting and not even. Yes, in case of React, yes. If you try to do the same thing in React without a framework, you would run into waterfalls. Do the same thing in Solid. No, you won't have waterfalls unless unless like you have literally some async data that depends on other async data. That's a necessary waterfall. And obviously, if you're code splitting, you still need to load the code for that component before you can start executing it. So you have the code and then you go fetch the data. So there's still that waterfall. So you still need route level hoisting if you really want to fully optimize things. But if once you have the code, things can always be fetched in parallel for as far as they can be.
Amazing. This is so far, I'm assuming, all client side only. If we talk about Solid Start, which has server side rendering, the framework, the Next.js equivalent of SolidJS, how would async signals work there? Would there be extra work to say, hey, render these signals on the server and pause streaming the server response? Is there a way to opt out of that in case you want? Because, like, I think server rendering and server components are great in theory, but in practice, they just lead to like worse perceived performance because you move the spinner from something the user can see, and maybe you can fill the time with like an interactive game or something, to like a spinning tab, and the server is not responding, and you just have to like wait. I think this is worse in many cases, and I would love an easy solution to this where I can choose like my code stays largely the same, 99% the same, and I just specify I want this signal to resolve on the client. So just send it maybe with a hole and then let the browser figure this out. I'm curious what that story looks like.
Yeah. So the part where like you just want this to be resolved on the client, that's I'm not sure if there's a specific implementation around that. Usually, if we're trying to render on the server, we want to ensure that we render the entire page on the server. We actually don't because there's actually benefits to it. You're closer to the data source, so it's helpful in many ways to first fetch everything that you can on the server and then send the HTML response. The problem about like you have to wait for the entire page to show up, that's very real. But also, basically every framework has now implemented out-of-order streaming, which is a very key kind of technology that solves this problem while also making sure that you can respond very quickly and you can fetch your data on the server. Because you can just add a suspense boundary around some component, around some UI, and if anything inside the suspense isn't ready, you can send everything outside of it along with a fallback as HTML to the browser. The browser will immediately show that, and later you can stream in more HTML content that gets replaced on the screen. So out-of-order streaming is probably the key piece of technology that addresses this problem, where server-side rendering can be very slow. This is another place where Solid version 2 is trying to optimize a lot. And it's actually by using like a mini reactivity system on the server that can make sure that on server, when you fetch some data, you only have to make the smallest possible updates and then or you have to do the least amount of work possible. And then you can send the HTML to the client and they can see the result. Now, SSR performance is like a a can of worms that I don't want to open up. But yes, out-of-order streaming is probably what addresses this. And that's a key part of almost every framework these days.
Including Solid Start.
Yes, Solid was one of the first to add this. It's because Ryan, the author of Solid, he previously worked at eBay, and eBay has their internal framework called Marco. And Marco is basically the pioneer of out-of-order streaming. They implemented that in 2014. Actually, before 2014, they wrote a blog post about it, which means they've had it for even longer. And it's only like 2020, 21 when we started seeing frameworks like React React implemented streaming SSR. 2020, I guess. I'm not exactly sure, but that's when we saw like these other frameworks, especially React, catching up. Solid had it pretty much since version 1. Wow. Because again, he had worked at Marco. He had seen the power of out-of-order streaming and the kind of experiences it unlocks, especially for like those e-commerce cases where the initial page loads means millions of dollars of impact. And yeah, that's been a part of Solid forever.
Would Solid Start have support for things like ISR or even PPR, progressive partial? What is it, man? Partial pre-rendering. That's right. Where you render a whole. I was like, what is happening? Does Solid Start have that, or will it get that soon?
Sure. Yeah. PPR is so there's two different ways to look at PPR. You can look at PPR from an infrastructure perspective, where it's almost a very Vercel specific feature. Like you have to utilize their infrastructure that can like enable that streaming a request from the CDN. But if you stop looking at from the infrastructure point of view, there's a great blog post that the CEO of Netlify posted called like PPR without a framework. And basically the idea is just that as soon as like you have an edge worker that does your rendering, and as soon as you receive a request, you just render everything you can up until like the first fallback, the synchronous fallback, and then you return that. That's literally it. The only optimization that Vercel provides on top of that is that you don't have to run that synchronous render. It's cached on the CDN. But other than that, it's a feature that basically any framework can achieve. Like in Remix, you can do it by making your loaders not async. Like if you just return all the data from your loaders as promises, all the data is going to be streamed, and which means we're not waiting on any data, which means your first render is going to be instant. It's not going to wait for anything. So that's basically all it is. So every framework can do PPR. Now, if you want to do the PPR the Vercel way, then every framework would need to find a way to integrate of like how to do this on Vercel's infrastructure. That's obviously only Next.js right now. But other than that, again, it's a very generic kind of concept.
You seem to have like a real comfort and fluency across the entire stack. Like you're talking about edge workers, you're talking about, I mean, you have this library that you wrote, use socket, and man, like you're all over the place. How does one get, I mean, there's so many people listening to this who are like, oh, all I do is like front end, CSS, JavaScript. There's other people who are like, oh, I just work on databases. But we talked about like, when we were talking about event sourcing, we talked about SQL and NoSQL and like, I'm curious, and we'll maybe start wrapping up the discussion a little bit, like how do you get that? How do you get this, like, I'm just sure, I just do everything, I live store, like, across the whole stack? I'm sure there's people listening who want that. What's the takeaway you would give them?
Yeah. This is a really interesting kind of point of discussion. I've basically never been just a backend or just a front-end developer. I have, like, since the starting of my career, I've done full stack apps. I've done everything from building the UI to building the server logic to the database to the deployment to auth and security. Like a funny story is like my very first freelance project in 2018. Yes, 2018. I just wanted to like build like give them the source code, and like I know nothing about deployment. I know nothing about Docker, about cloud. I can just write the code that runs in localhost and send it to you, and you figure it out. Yeah. But they were not a technical team. They were a startup. So I had to figure out, like, I spent a few months or a couple of weeks trying to figure out Heroku and MongoDB, and it was very painful. But at the end, I was like, oh, this is great. I can now build and deploy complete apps on my own. Yeah. And I've just been riding that high pretty much since the beginning of this capability that I can take an idea from nothing, from abstract thoughts into working implementations all by myself. And so when this is how I think about full stack development. Full stack to me doesn't mean front end plus back end plus whatever else. Full stack to me means how much, like, how far can you go from an idea to a working implementation? Yeah. And so when all my profession has just been full stack development, it also kind of forces me to look into everything, because I cannot be a good full stack developer if I don't understand all these pieces well enough. Because yes, technically full stacks is front end plus back end plus all these things. And that's what it comes down to when you have to think about uh, like how to do this efficiently or how to do this properly, or even just how do you best, like how to be productive in this. Because for a long time, our tools in the JavaScript ecosystem were not they did not enable you to do good full stack development. Our tools helped us write good backends and write good frontends. They did not help us write good full stack apps. This is My first framework was Meteor, and Meteor was basically the only framework in my history that enabled me to do good full stack development. Now there are modern frameworks that are trying to do this. Solid Start, and Next.js, like they are trying to embrace this full React server components as well. But this is a new kind of frameworks are now entering this space. I have been in this space for 8-9 years, where I'm trying to like understand the complete picture. So I feel like a lot of people just shoehorn themselves into, I'm a front end dev or I do back end, and it's just really bad for, like, okay, that's fine if that's what your employer is paying you for, and you don't want to spend time outside of that, that's completely fine. But to me, like if I want to build good full stack applications, I have to learn all these different pieces and how they fit together. The most important part, if I don't understand how they fit together, then I don't know how to build good full stack apps.
So the takeaway is try and learn as you go.
Yeah, there's really no shortcut to that, unfortunately. And a lot of my understanding of this just comes from watching 5 hour long Ryan Carniato streams. He is like, if I have like whatever understanding of like the full stack web space I have, he's like this 10 levels above me. It's impossible for me to catch up to that. But even just listening to him and trying to understand the things that he's saying or he's building, it has given me like incredible insight into all this space.
Awesome. Well, we put a link to his YouTube channel in the show notes for sure. Do you feel like you can build anything you want? If you have an idea for a startup, you just build it.
In many cases, yeah. Now, if that anything means, it's kind of like Batman, where with infinite prep time, he can defeat Superman, he can defeat anyone, right? So yeah, if you give me infinite prep time, sure. But obviously, there are things that I'm not good at. I am not good at good UI design. I can build functioning UIs that look decent. I cannot make them look great. I cannot build games. I cannot build incredibly memory constrained or performance constrained apps like with Rust that a lot of people do. Like I cannot build bundlers. I cannot build compilers. I cannot build like video rendering engines. But yeah, if it's a full stack app, then yes, I can build it. I can deploy it. I can make it do crazy things. And yeah, I think that's pretty. There's a lot of use case for just that.
Man, that must feel so powerful. I will say I feel the same, almost exactly as you. I could with infinite prep time probably build like 3D games and Unreal Engine and whatever, but given like a business app, I feel, and it's truly an incredible feeling. And that's honestly, Dave, that's why this podcast exists, because you know the power we feel. There's people who don't feel that, and I want them to feel, because like once you can go, you can go. I built an entire startup in 3 weeks and then never shipped it because I didn't feel like it, and that's so incredible. And so, hey, I just want to take a moment and just like thank you for being on the pod. For sure, like you shared like actual career tips that will help people get noticed and make, I think, whether they become like well known or not, ultimately they just create high quality relationships, and I think that's what matters. Ultimately, like there's this great experiment done by Harvard, 7 decades, 70-year study called the Longevity Project, where they followed people from their birth to their death. And a lot of people on their deathbed were not like, get me my trophies, get me my money. They were like, bring me my people. And you've taught us how to do that today. But you didn't stop there. You also taught us about event sourcing. You broke it down from first principles. And of course, the Solid.js. On behalf of myself and everyone listening, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this with us today.
Of course, I'm very happy to be here. Very happy to chat about these. And yeah, if people want to chat about this more, I am available at any time on Twitter or whatever else. So yeah, feel free to hit me up with questions and stuff.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Dev Agrawal. I hope you found it as useful and as insightful as I did. He shared so much, from becoming a person who makes impact, well, someone well known, someone who speaks at conferences, to event sourced architecture, a real deep dive, and covering Solid.js and React and the interplay between those two. If you want to follow Dev or learn more about him, there's links to his social profiles in the show notes. There's links to some content that he's created about this as well in the show notes. Feel free to find him, ask him questions, pick his brain. He's more than happy to be a community player. Similarly, if you want to access... What did I struggle saying that? If you want to access any of the previous episodes, maybe with Taylor Desseyn, event sourcing or more, those links are also in the show notes. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, then a great way to support it with no cost to you really is to just share it. Tell your friends, share it on social media. It's a great way. If you're watching on YouTube, then if you subscribe to the channel and like the video, maybe leave a comment. That's also a great way to signal that this is something worth engaging with. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, then you can leave a review. Any review up to 5 stars would be helpful, whatever you think the podcast deserves. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you for being a part of the podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.